Hello, and welcome to Mormon Stories, Thrive Stories Edition. I am your host, Margi DeLynn, and I am joined today by my co-host of the day, John DeLynn. How you doing over there, John?
Hey, Margie. I'm excited to be your co-host for today.
I am excited to have you as my co-host. How's your morning been?
We juggle a lot of balls here at the Open Stories Foundation, but I love my job.
Let me point out something about my morning that you helped it be a joy. How's that?
That sounds great.
This morning, John made a veggie stir fry. I feel like what was in that stir fry, because it was magic this morning when I ate it.
Had Brussels sprouts, mixed vegetables, mushrooms, snow peas.
Were there beans in it?
Beans and rice.
Beans and rice. It was delicious. So a little joy. Back to Thrive Stories, though. So for those of you that are new to Thrive Stories is an interview series that is largely focused on healing and growth. So the idea is to pick an area of thriving post-faith transition and to explore it. They tend to be shorter, around 2 hours, as opposed to the longer form interviews of Mormon stories. And you can either nominate someone you know, or you can nominate yourself. So if you're interested in doing that, we'll have a link kind of below that you can click on. Some sample areas of thriving could be what we're going to kind of focus on today, parenting, or it could be healthy marriage. It could be finding community. It could be rebuilding identity or purpose. What am I missing, John? What are some of the other ones?
I don't know. So just anything that you think is a common area where people struggle in a faith crisis, and where you think you have something to share. It can be anything if you feel like it's broadly applicable.
Yeah. I think one thing I would say is and it's very likely this might be true because we've just started this series, but if you feel like you're not represented in this series yet, do consider submitting. We would love to have as many stories as possible to reflect just sort of the diverse experiences that we all have. So we welcome you if you don't feel seen here yet. And I think we only have maybe 7 interviews, so that's likely. Submit away. We would love to hear from you.
And the instructions are in the description, either on Facebook or YouTube or the blog. You can read the instructions and click on the link to apply. That's
right. So I'm excited today because we will be focusing on an area that I view as one of the core areas that came up for me in particular amidst our faith transition is kind of a hot spot, a place that I felt a lot of emotion around and felt like I really leaned in wholeheartedly to rebuilding. So we will be exploring a few parenting interviews actually in the next few months because we know this is true. And we're just delighted to start off exploring parenting with our guest today, who is John Ogden, who is co-founder of Uplift Kids. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're so appreciative. So for those of you who don't know anything about John Ogden, we're going to have, just before we dive into the general interview, have him introduce himself. And that's kind of broad. So maybe I'll narrow it down by saying just, a short description about what brings you joy, what you love, and maybe who you love and kind of where you are in this moment.
And your book.
Yeah.
You can include that too, for sure.
Yeah. It's been a while. 2016, I wrote a book called When Mormons Doubt, and it aims to help bridge divides when people believe or don't believe. And so it centers on the timeless ideals of truth, beauty, and goodness, saying if you can kind of agree on these ideals, hopefully you can pursue unity in life. So that's the book. And then your question was, what brings me joy?
Yeah, and kind of like as a snapshot to kind of your life, because
Yeah.
it's a big question, right? To describe yourself. So just to describe a few things that you love, who you love in your life
Yeah.
right now, and maybe a snapshot of what your life looks like.
I love my kids and my wife, and I have 2 kids. They're 11 and 7, and my life day to day looks like a lot of reading and writing. I am, as part of Uplift Kids, and looking into the world's wisdom traditions and asking questions about how to parent when you don't have an orthodox view of the world. And so that's kind of my day in and day out, is trying to figure out. I mean, I'm living the question.
Mm,
I feel like every answer I get yields more questions, and parenting is just a big project.
yeah.
And so that's what my day-to-day life looks like. And what brings me joy is finding just community and connection, and with other people and with the past as well.
Mm, that's beautiful. Beautiful. Well, so I kind of already outed the topic as being parenting. So why don't we just kind of start? How about we start in your kind of childhood, maybe where you grew up? And as a boy, we'll just kind of do the younger years first. Just what you remember about family life and your experience of being in a family, and maybe even what parenting style you feel like you experienced.
Mhm. I grew up in Utah County, and m- the parenting style I experienced was structured, and I really liked it. So it's very structured, to the point where, we read scriptures every morning while having breakfast. We had the cracked wheat on Monday. Trying to remember it. Oatmeal on Tuesday, cream of wheat Wednesday, French toast Thursday, and cold cereal Friday. I think I got that right.
Was it
But it was
literally
like,
that
Wow.
structure?
yeah, it was like every single day. It was the
Wow.
exact. That was the thing that we had that day. And then like dinner right at, I think it was 5:30. I'm trying to remember the exact structure, but it was just like to the dot.
Mm,
And I liked it. I didn't know anything that was different, and there was something really wonderful about the structure for the most part. As long as I didn't come home late from a friend's house, then it was just pleasant, and it provided like a good foundation. So between that and just attending the LDS church every single week, there was a great sense of safety
mhm,
and a great sense of belonging to a ward community. Um, yeah, a lot of great memories. And I'll say, as I look back on, uh, as a parent now, like I'm just kind of in awe at my parents' ability to hold it all together and so well. Uh, they did so phenomenal and continue to be so phenomenal in so many fronts. It's just trying to hold a house down and keep it clean, and keep
yeah.
get dinner on the table, and all these things. Just, it's a hard job. And
Yeah.
my parents, at least as a kid, from a kid's my child's child eye, they
Mhm.
made it look so easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm hearing very clear expectations,
Hmm.
right? That you kind of know what's coming
Hmm.
and in your day, quite literally.
Yeah.
And a lot of kind of, and that actually forms quite a bit of stability too.
Yeah.
So feeling a sense of security and stability, and I hear belonging
Hmm.
being a core component.
Yeah.
Did you have a big like what was how many siblings did
Just
you?
2 younger
You
sisters,
had
so I was the
two
oldest.
and you were the oldest. Okay. Um, and so what I'm hearing is that it felt quite comfortable for you and like a pretty good match for your needs at the time,
Yeah.
in the child's eye,
Yeah.
at least.
Hmm. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
That's right.
Are there any stories that come to mind from there, from
Um,
those days? No pressure.
about structure.
Yeah, just remembering parenting or any situations that you were in or
Yeah, a few. One that stands out is just my mom reading to us. She read widely and from a lot of different texts and encouraged us to read widely. I remember, um, for whatever reason, wanting to read every single Newbery Metal book. I don't think I got through every single one, but just like this sense of like it's really important to read. It's really important to hear a variety of stories, and I didn't always comprehend what I read,
Mhm.
but that really instilled that had a big influence on me, and it made a big impact on my life. And I think looking back, I've just recently realized like, oh, there was a sense of humanism even at a very young age that I'm not only part of like a Mormon community, but I'm also a human being who has my single story, but so does everybody else on the entire planet. And so the Newbery Metal books, you know, they tried to they're often dramatic and serious and probably to a fault, but they do there's a quite a variety there in terms of perspectives of the world. And so at a young age, I was gaining those various perspectives, and that like I said really still is alive in me today.
Wow, so the world of books.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing too is that I'm sensing at least a family culture,
Yeah.
which is quite different, right? And just being it's different than like the religious upbringing. This idea of a
Yeah.
family culture and your parents actually having values, being values driven on their own, like this
Yeah.
idea of books, right?
Hmm.
Or humanism and story, that you have one story, but there are a lot of stories out there. That, and even the dinner time,
Hmm.
the importance of sort of gathering, eating,
Yep.
and the moments that kind of emerge from those times, that is ringing, which I love family culture. That was something that was
Mm.
always really important to me, and I viewed
Mm.
it as very separate from kind of religion. And I'm hearing that feels like it was important and tangible.
Yeah. It's a wonderful way to put it. I don't know if I thought about it like that, but yes, definitely there was a family culture. And I think probably through my child's eye, I just thought this was the culture. This is what everybody did. And this is all Mormonism. It probably wasn't distinguishing it much in my childhood. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is family culture and this is Mormon culture. It was just kind of
Yes.
like, this is the culture. But
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. There was a family culture that that I think is unique and I appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so if we were gonna kinda play it out maybe through adolescence, a time where kind of if we're looking at sort of the developmental stages, children usually will individuate, distance a
Hmm.
little bit, explore maybe. And I think sometimes in Mormonism it doesn't happen in quite that way. But take us through sort of your experience of the parenting style and family culture, and if that played out in any particular way for you.
It,
And if I can just
yeah.
add to that a tiny bit, I think about, as we tried to parent once the church wasn't an option for us anymore, uh, I realized how much of a role the church played as a parenting strategy. In other
Mm,
words, there are a lot of things that a parent looks to the church to be responsible for, so that to fill all the things that a parent kind of wants their kid to experience.
mm,
And then when you don't have the church, it's all of a sudden, oh my gosh, there are all these things that I relied on the church for, and now I've got to figure out how to do that on my own. It's almost like
mhm,
homeschooling
mhm.
versus like public schooling. So in it, woven into Margie's question, I would also love to hear your thoughts on kind of how your parents look to the church to provide you with the things that they felt was important for you as a parent.
Yeah.
Because as you talk later about your faith crisis and your own parenting,
Mhm.
I imagine these themes are going to reappear. Maybe.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Margie?
Mhm, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. they really are interwoven. My dad was my scoutmaster, and so I was like, he was a very good scoutmaster. He did an extremely good job of getting people to Eagle Scout. Just again, a phenomenal job of just saying, okay, here are the steps we need to take to get to this place. And so this week we're going to do this. This week we're going to do this. Next week we're
The
going to do this.
breakdown.
Yeah. And so, I got me Eagle Scout at 13, and you just did it systematically. And so it really was like this blending of family and church culture, where it was, again, just kind of one and the same. And then working in the ward, it was, again, just kind of interwoven with the church culture. For whatever reason, I liked, again, that structure that was provided both by the church and in the home. And I was very interested in doing the checklist and doing it well.
Mhm.
Okay, just give me the checklist and I'll do it, and here I go through the process. And so I didn't have, I mean, maybe my parents would disagree with me, but I didn't have like a big rebellious streak. I was kind of like, okay, so I need to get my Eagle Scout, and then I need to be good in Teachers Quorum, and then I need to be good in Priest Quorum, and then I'm going to go on my mission right after I graduate from high school. And this is, here I go. I know the steps to take to get there. And I was just convinced that this is the single way to happiness.
The plan.
And it yielded a lot of good results in my teenage years. I still think a lot of good results. Just being very interested in seminary and fitting in with a crowd that generally wanted to do good. And I would say to a fault at times, is in my particular instance of yielding a self-righteous attitude of like, okay, I've done the checklist, and so I'm good. And you who aren't completely measuring up to the checklist, you're bad. And so it kind of created this binary worldview where if the checklist is right, then being against the checklist is wrong. And that is the definition of self-righteousness. An inability to see, which is somewhat surprising given the things that I said about humanism and pluralism, an inability to see like, oh, there are actually many ways to live and live well.
Yeah. During those years, do you remember feeling like what are your thoughts and emotions that come up when you remember your teen years? Is it that did you enjoy the checklist? Like was it a match for you that you were like, yes, achievement was joyful and I liked the process and I liked checking off the boxes? Or was it more, I liked achieving, so I liked it when it was done, and I liked, that sense of accomplishment and that I was good and I got the approval and I got the love? Or like, how would you explain sort of your mental health and kind of, your feelings at that time?
I felt good about it on the whole. I liked the process of doing a checklist, and I liked having accomplished the checklist, and I liked the approval from finishing the checklist. I was invigorated by it. Like one example that I can give of this is the church changed their Duty to God award. So at this time, and so like I earned my Duty to God, and then they changed it, and I was like really excited that they it's embarrassing to say this, like really excited that they changed it, because it meant that I could earn the new version of it. And so I went through
You
and
could do like
said,
double?
yeah. And so I was like, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And the same thing, like in seminary, I was like, okay, here are the scripture mastery scriptures. Okay, I'm going to memorize all the scripture mastery scriptures. And I remember going to the seminary teachers. They said that there was this contest, like if you could memorize all of them, you could go and you could get a prize. And I went, and after doing it, I was like, hey, I memorized all these. What do I get? And they're like, oh, like kind of like we weren't serious about that. But they pulled down the Teachings of Gordon B. Hinckley book from the shelf, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you get this," and they handed it to me. But it's clear that they're just like making up on the spot. But for whatever reason, it was just like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm in, that kind of
Right.
attitude. And
Yeah.
for better and for worse, that was the attitude.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a little exercise I want to do just for fun. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's like I think about like maybe eight different dimensions that a religion often plays in a person's life. And I'm going to ask you to just briefly assess, and I'll name each dimension. And I want to hear you reflect on, so there's three options for each. So what John Ogden wanted as a child and adolescent, what your family wanted for you, and then what the church wanted for you. And I want you to tell me which was dominant in each of the domains.
Oh, that's such a good question.
Is that okay?
Mhm.
Okay. So we'll start with one. So like, and so what I'm about to list are the 8 of the things that I think religions provide most. So the first I'll just say is identity. So were you primarily John Ogden first? Were you primarily an Ogden first? Or were you primarily a Mormon first in your identity?
The inverse of what you just listed. Primarily a Mormon, Ogden, John, I would say.
Okay. So you were a Mormon first and Ogden second, and then your individual goals and priorities for yourself came, or self-knowledge or pride of who you were came third, which means you were working to be as much of a reflection as what you felt the model Mormon was as possible. And that was your upbringing as it related to identity.
Right.
Is that fair?
It is.
Okay. So like, you're like, I'm a Mormon. Yes, I am. What I got to do to be righteous, I'll do that.
Yep.
And like what your needs or your desires were, didn't matter. Didn't even think about it.
Yeah. I didn't even know that they existed apart from this. It's like,
So,
of course my desires are this, because that's all that there is. Like, that's what I am. Yeah.
That's
so
funny to
at
hear.
that point, it's like the self is merged with,
or there is no self, or there is no self.
That's kind of what I was, right? It's more merged with in your developing mind. It is the church, and it is what your parents.
Yeah.
I'm a child of God, and that's my identity.
Okay. So that's identity. Second one, let's just say, is morality. So it's like what you think is moral, what your parents thought is moral, or what the church thought was moral. And was there any difference between 2 and 3, between your parents and the church?
No, I don't think there was different. I don't think there were differences. Yeah. So I would say the same order.
Okay. Yeah. Church first. But probably church and Ogden were indistinguishable, I'm guessing. Was there ever, like with me, like there were times where my dad would like say, hey, I know the church teaches this, but this is, this other thing is
you're right.
Did that, was that?
No, that wasn't a thing.
That wasn't a thing.
Okay. So morality was Mormonism's morality.
Okay.
Yep,
that's right.
For you. Okay. So spirituality. Was spirituality the same?
It was.
Mormon first.
Yeah. Because spirituality in the home was family meeting every week and scripture study every morning. So that was.
Any personal spirituality that would have been different from Mormon spirituality? Kind of like your private spirituality that felt maybe off a little bit different than what the church was kind of wanting for you?
The closest thing was a high councilman one time visited our ward and said that his favorite book was Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. And I was really intrigued. Yeah, I was really intrigued.
That's Stoicism, right?
Yeah, that's Stoicism. So I went to his house.
That's another ism. That's a different ism. I don't know about other isms. That sounds problematic.
I went to his house and asked if I could borrow the book, and he lent it to me. But at that time, it was just another thing that incorporated into Mormonism. It was given to me in the frame of Mormonism. And so it wasn't antagonistic or heretical in any sense. I was like, oh, this is another thing. This is the best of books. Study out out of the best of books. And so even then, when it was more expansive, it was still like, oh, this is still a Mormon frame for approaching that.
Okay. How about community? Was your community the ward, basically? Did your parents have much of a community outside of your ward?
No.
So your community was the church.
Yeah, and seminary
Seminary.
and seminary students at school.
Okay, in school.
hmm
Okay. So your friends were either in your ward or at school, and were your friends Mormon pretty
Yeah.
much?
Yeah, all.
And you
Oh,
grew, you
oh,
grew up.
literally-
Springville,
literally.
Utah. And
Oh,
so,
Springville, yeah.
So the seminary is, on the same property, and that's my group of friends.
Okay. Okay. So this probably will be really quick. Meaning of life
Yeah, same.
was
Yeah, the same priority.
and purpose in life
Uh-huh.
was whatever the church, which was what? If you had to describe like in a one sentence, the elevator pitch of meaning and purpose of life for you as a Mormon.
What are the faith, repentance, baptism, gift of the Holy Ghost, and endure to the end? Is that the
How about
think-
mission, temple marriage?
Yep. Mission, temple marriage, yeah. Those are part of the checklist.
Obey the commandments, all that stuff. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then resolution about existential questions, life after death, all that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Same.
Okay. I mean, I guess this is a typical Orthodox Mormon upbringing
It's
where-
very vanilla in so many ways.
where your parents kind of can just say, mom's going to do household mom stuff, dad's going to work. And then you just get on the Mormon church bus,
Mhm.
go to youth, go to primary, go to church, have Mormon friends, stay in the Mormon bubble. The Mormon community is
Mhm.
going to just be how we raise you.
Mhm.
Your parents weren't having to think about a lot or really extemporaneously do anything. It's just we all got on the bus and we follow the plan. Is that fair?
Except for they didn't have to think about it a lot. I think that they did think about. I think they thought about parenting a lot and even read parenting books, even
Oh.
beyond Mormonism. And so, as I look at their parenting approaches, it's like I don't know if they were reading the Ayers. Is that their name?
Oh, Richard and Linda.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But when I read stuff like that, I'm like, oh, this is
Yeah.
So like
the same world.
Covey stuff
Covey,
or
exactly.
Iyer stuff.
Yeah,
So Mormon,
yeah, exactly. So it's where's
It's-
the line?
but
Yeah,
it's
so-
well, they're thoughtful, Harvard educated kind of people.
Yeah, I
They're-
would say it is not a default parenting.
Yeah.
Right.
That Richard and Linda
That's-
are like very involved,
Mhm.
thoughtful, like it is effortful.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say.
Yeah, so maybe maybe the thing I'm pointing to there is like an educated LDS
yeah.
approach. Is like,
So your parents get bonus points basically.
yeah, as I say, I think they're phenomenal. I like their approach.
Yeah, because they're reading extra. I mean, it's still in a Mormon frame,
Uh-huh.
but they're going beyond just the correlated curriculum
Mhm.
to make sure they're on point, being thoughtful.
Yeah.
Finding the best, even Mormon sources, but best educated sources
Mhm.
to enhance to make sure they're on point.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
It does sound like education was a value
Yeah,
in your
big
family
value.
culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought that'd be an interesting framing because we'll probably
It is.
probably
yeah.
come back to all that.
On
later.
the other side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
and it keys up the other side well. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we could kind of play it through to kind of when you kind of had those first moments of where it wasn't working so
Mhm.
well or a first flag.
And a supplement to that is like, let's just say up through mission.
Mhm.
Were there any points where you want to go off track or you weren't on plan or things happened in your family that like started to penetrate the Mormon bubble? Or was it literally just like the Mormon version of Beaver, Leave It to Beaver from birth until temple marriage?
Yeah, go ahead.
Not to temple marriage, but to mission.
To mission,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So I went on my mission like 4 months after graduating high school. So it was like
Yeah. Oh,
not going to
wow.
college, just like right off, go. Because I was among the oldest in my class. And so the mission is where the first moment when I was started to wonder like, oh, something isn't quite right.
Yeah. What was it about your mission that you feel like, do you remember what in particular?
There are many things. One is on the second day of my mission, we tracked it into somebody who told us that Joseph Smith got into a gunfight. And I corrected him. I sat him down and read the Doctrine and Covenants, and I was like, "This is the version. Like, I don't know what you're reading." And then some months later, I was in a an LDS church library for P Day. I'm not sure why, but I like pulled down the history of the church by B.H. Roberts, and it told a different. I don't know if it was that text actually. I can't remember the text, but it told like Joseph Smith had a gun, and um, I was really disoriented, and I felt off because I had just told this. I've been telling people, generally my version of the story, and I realized like, oh, here's a church approved source that
Mm,
tells me that he did in fact shoot at people in Carthage jail, and so yeah, it would make complete sense for somebody to interpret that as a gunfight, and so that was one moment. Others are like talking to people who told me about Joseph Smith's polygamy because I served in Ventura, California. And so there are many evangelicals who had talking points against Mormonism and talking to them face to face and being like, no, you're wrong. Like similar to the guy who said Joseph Smith got in a gunfight. And then realizing kind of down the line, Joseph Smith's polygamy, the book of Abraham,
mm,
I kept, I, I just assumed like the narrative is 100% solid. And then I would find like, oh, wait a second. Here's another thing. Here's
mhm,
another thing. Here's another thing. And so on my mission, I wrote to my dad and was like, this is really hard. And at the time, I was in a state where I was just really struggling emotionally because of this, such that like the thought that I would hold on to is like, I'm going to have breakfast in the morning. Cause at least it's like looking back and it's like some form of sensuality to have like a
mhm,
tasty meal. And you're so starved on that front as a missionary that it was like the thing I would kind of focus in on. Well, at least I'll make a really delicious breakfast for myself tomorrow morning,
mm,
and kind of get through it. Um, my dad sent me a book of commonly answered questions or common questions that people have and answers to them. And then I also wrote a high school teacher who wasn't LDS and like told her, my psychology teacher told her what I was going through. And she gave me the advice that like, you committed to serve and you should just focus on serving. And then when you come back, you can open up these questions if you want. And I really appreciated both of those, that letter from my dad and book and the letter from my psychology teacher were enough to say, I'm just going to focus on getting through the rest of this um, as well as I can and like call it good for these questions. I'm not going to let them eat me anymore. And so that's what happened to kind of pull me through my mission.
So do you feel like you shelved those to
Yeah.
get done with the mission? Is that
Yeah,
how you might
absolutely.
say that?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. But as you were explaining, so most of the holes came from outside sources, though, like people you were teaching or talking to
Yeah.
people kind of outside the faith. Is that right?
And then finding that the inside didn't either said, yes, that's true,
That's right. So,
or,
like church approved sources,
yeah,
you found out it was actually
yeah,
true. Hmm.
after telling people, no, it's not true.
Right.
One other example that really rocked me was walking by this apartment complex and hearing some people on the top floor like talking about Catholics, and we stopped and listened. And then they switched from talking about Catholics to talking about Mormons. And so we found the door
Uh-huh.
and like knocked on the door, and they opened the door, and they just had wide eyes, like, whoa, we were just talking about Mormons, and here you are. And they pulled us in, and they said that they had just watched the South Park episode where Joseph Smith is looking into a hat. And so it was the same thing again, where I was like, no, you can't believe something that you see on South Park. This is the real story. I'm going to set you straight, and then finding out like, oh, he did look into a hat. So by that point, I was just like, oh my
Oh.
gosh, I keep saying this and this and this and this, and then finding out like, oh, it doesn't add up. Um, so again, that was all the turmoil. And then that was like, I shelved it, said,
Wow.
I'm just going to finish and just do my best to try to help people find values in life. My the kind of, if they wanted to get baptized, that's great. But if I can just help them in some way quit smoking or, find solace in some way, that's my goal now. And so that's kind of like
Mm,
the focus of my mission after that faith crisis.
yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like it kind of shifted your approach a little bit because
Oh, definitely.
you kept kind of getting these sideswiped by
Uh-huh.
information that you kind of changed your shift away from maybe the
Mhm.
narrative. Did you feel because you didn't have a sense of confidence as much in that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it shifted me to a listening posture far more. Like,
Ah,
okay, I don't know. I'm just going to listen. Oh, you're sick, as they're called, because
mhm.
there were many in Bakersfield. I'm just going to listen. What do you believe? That's kind of
Oh, wow.
my default. And then, yeah, we would still teach the lessons, but a lot of my time was spent listening.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's follow it a little bit. So you kind of you shelved through your mission. You get done with your mission.
Hmm.
And then take us to what happens next. Like, is there a point to which that either shelf breaks, you take it down,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. So I went to BYU, was so focused on schooling and dating that I wasn't thinking about the book of Abraham. Like it wasn't coming up in my daily life,
yeah.
as it doesn't come up, in people's daily lives, generally speaking. So the hard questions were just like not present. And so I got a bachelor's in English literature, and then right after did a master's at BYU in writing. And wasn't till just after that. Well, I met my wife in the writing center at BYU, and then we both did masters in English. And it wasn't till, and then we got married a few years after that. This is around 2012, 2013. My best friend from high school left Mormonism, and then my my youngest sister, left as well.
Mhm.
And so at that point, I was like, okay, what I guess I need to revisit all these things that
Mm.
I that I opened and closed on my mission. And so I opened it and I was like, oh, it's like,
Mm.
uh, these things again are valid.
Yeah.
And I remember the moment that changed for me was around something that I could not figure out even as a missionary, which is how did the Book of Mormon come to be? I could not figure that out. And I was really convinced by Hugh Nibley's statement, like, you couldn't do this as a young person. Can you imagine? He lists like 70 things or whatever. I don't remember how many, all these things that you would have to do to be able to produce the Book of Mormon. And it wasn't until I read various accounts of different theories about how it could have happened that I realized it clicked. This is the final thing in my worldview that clicked, which was, yes, I couldn't write it. I'm not a genius. That doesn't mean that it's impossible for it to have come about a different way than Joseph said. And so it was that shift that I was like, okay, the dominant narrative isn't true. And then immediately, like, all the, just wide-eyed, what do I do type of
Mhm.
questions.
Yeah. Were you alone in that, or was your wife did you end up having, like, an individual journey? Did you guys share
Yeah, we
with
shared. Uh-huh.
You did
Yeah.
share.
Yep.
So did you kinda go through it together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
My wife was more invested in the feminist side of things,
Mhm.
and I was more invested in the history side of things. But we both kind of came to consensus. All it took for me was she just asked me once, like, "Okay, just invert the genders in this meeting that we're in, in church. And if you do that enough times, you kind of realize like, oh, yeah, this is
kind of problematic.
This is uncomfortable. If I inverted the genders, every single meeting you're in, invert the genders, and it becomes pretty clear like, okay, that's valid too. In addition to the history stuff that I was wrestling with. And so we were essentially on the same page. Very quickly.
Yeah. So, I mean, was there a time, I'm trying to think about how you might have conceptualized being parents before faith crisis, like what you would have thought, this is kind of how it works, or this is what it's going to look like, or did you have that? Did you have enough time to kind of formulate what kind of parent or what parenting would look like previous to that? And if so, what are some of the things that come to mind? And it can be beliefs that you kind of, like I had a belief around safety, like, okay, as a mom, it's my job. If I do all the things, I'm going to do all the things, and I'm going to, have them know the stories of the scriptures. I'm going to have them, and then they'll be safe. And right. So that's a belief I had going into parenting. Did you have any kind of beliefs going into prior to your faith transition?
Yeah. My child was 2 or between 2 and 3 when it happened. And so I did have beliefs, and they were just like going back to the checklist. Like there's a clear plan laid out, and we follow the plan. I don't know if I would have been as enthusiastic about a mission even then, just because of the conflict that I had. I don't think I was like adamantly opposed to it, but it would have been like, if my kid is really wrestling, I might not push that really hard just because of the traumatic experience that, the trauma that happened in reconciling belief on my mission.
You would characterize that as traumatic for you?
The mission, yeah, absolutely, because everything was safe up leading to that point, and then on my mission, when I realized, like, oh my goodness, this narrative is not the dominant narrative. It's not true. It doesn't match. Very, very traumatic to have that large of a shift in worldview right then.
And to be responsible for teaching it to others.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a combination. Absolutely.
And it's not like your mission is going to be set up to allow a nuanced, progressive form of teaching. It's going to be like teach a conservative Mormonism or go home kind of, I don't know.
I mean, I tried to listen as much as possible and try to open it as much as possible, but the goal is baptize. Like, and if you're not baptizing, you're not doing your job. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about it, the way it worked for you, where you said you went so soon after high school, it's kind of like your first introduction into the wide world.
Yeah.
Like that the
100%.
books had been talking about that you'd been reading through the Newberry books, and so here's your experience, and you're having, instead of a lineup, like it lines up with, that whole childhood, or you're having all this discord. And it's like your first time into that would be deeply, I mean, I completely understand the trauma, and you have no people. It's kind of like all the people that you would look to for support. You actually don't really have them while you're on your mission. So, and you're kind of in a structure where you have those expectations again of you. So that really kind of makes sense as like your first adult breath. Being out there and being like, wait, my reality and this greater reality, not lining up at all. Yeah. Okay. So you kind of went into almost like a default, like, I'm going to do what my parents did, which I think is really common. Like the way I'm looking to parent, except for that sort of mission where your experience actually is being kind of brought into account there too. So tell us about maybe what changed in that moment and what that was like, that pivotal moment where, you're now in a different place looking at parenting, what that felt like, what your fear was, what the emotions were.
confusion, like paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to figure out, okay, how do you parent? Like, how do you raise a kid in light of all of this? And so it was just like a world of possibilities and like feeling paralyzed by how many possibilities existed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was that pretty long? Did it last a long time? Do you remember that sort of where it dissolves and you kind of have that sense of like everything you looked to is kind of dissolving? Was that a long process? Was it quite like, how would you describe that process?
I would describe it very long. I would describe it as I'm sitting here still in the process.
Yeah.
So this was 2013. I thought like we still attended church every week, often only Sunday school or primary until like 2016, 2017 ish, just because we still wanted to belong to a community. Still wanted to like meet our neighbors and participate in that way. Um, and so yeah, through all that time, it was like dicey. You know, how much do I say? How much do I not say? How do I help people feel comfortable and feel, the spirit in the vernacular, in the setting? If I say this, am I just being aggressive and mean, or is it helpful for growth to say this? Navigating all of that. But mainly it was just like, I just want people. I want a community. And I
Mm.
know that's one part of happiness. And I know this community and I know this language. And so I'm just going to keep sitting here in the wrestle. Um, and so, yeah, that's what was happening during that time.
How long would you say you kind of maybe showed up on some level and kind of kept in the wrestle because of that community piece, if you had to kind of say?
Um, at least 3 or 4 years. And then even then it wasn't 100% no. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's ongoing because the question of how do you have a community? How do you have belonging? How do you do it, especially for kids, is in my opinion, very difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
why,
Truth.
why that face, Margie?
Because it's so true and it's so large and it is such a loss.
Mhm.
And then looking at it and trying to think of what to do next, it's heavy.
Mhm.
Yeah, what I'm thinking of is like, I mean, we also chose to bring our kids to Utah,
Mhm.
and then I do this, and then I get
Mhm.
excommunicated, and just all of a sudden, like up until my disciplinary council, our kids were active.
Mhm.
Like we're talking Beehive president, Laurel president, 10, 15 years after we stopped believing.
Right.
But we're in Utah.
Yeah.
Like it's either like, the Mormon kids, or like you perceive at the time kind of bad kids or lost kids or whatever.
Mhm.
And so, what do you do? And we just went through like 8 different things the church just automatically provides.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you don't have that. So how do you replace it?
Mhm.
And then we've tried, you may talk about this, but like even we've tried to build communities.
Yeah.
Cause like, how do you match a youth program where all these awesome adult leaders, if you're in a good situation, a good ward, all these awesome leaders are like when I was growing up, Mormon leaders just wanting my best, wanting my welfare,
Mhm.
wanting me to achieve, wanting me to succeed.
Yep.
There to, when I'm down, picking me back up, leading these awesome youth activities, whether it's youth conferences or temple trips or scouting. It's just, you just show up and you get all that.
Yep.
If you're in a good ward.
Mhm.
And friends.
Yep.
Right. And generally good friends. There's going to be exceptions, but generally friends that are trying to be honest, that are trying to do good, that are trying to go to college and have a family someday. and then all of a sudden that's just whoosh, gone, you know? And yeah.
Yeah, well said. That's exactly the experience. And I had good young men's leaders. So it's it's
Yeah.
really disorienting.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be a lot simpler to figure out this next part. And I just am still in the question. I basically am just like, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the answer. That's the answer I know for sure, is that it's hard. Beyond that,
Yeah.
it's like, oh,
A couple things that are really interesting around kind of the loss piece. It reminds me kind of a little bit of like where you love kind of large and deep. The loss is large and
yep,
deep.
100%.
And I think this, your experience with community and loving it and having such a good experience, that loss on the other side, and then wanting to give that to your children.
Mhm.
It's so, what would I say, influenced by your experience of it, versus you can take someone, let's just say like me, where the community piece, I grew up kind of all over, and I'm introverted, and the community piece was never something that for me really stuck out, right?
Mhm.
So the loss of that is completely different.
Mm,
And that's what I think
Yeah.
is so interesting about the journey, is where we're so different as to where the holes really emotionally devastate us, I feel like. And it feels really proportional to what we love,
Yep.
to what we really are experience with that thing. And then I was going to just say, the tricky thing too, I feel like in these, is that you're not just dealing with the loss of community, though I'm hearing you there, and that but you're losing community at the same time that you're also trying to navigate relationships now,
Yep.
right? That are changing because of your changing belief, your identity, which is changing because of your belief, this existential piece where you're like, it's the fact that for many of us, it's simultaneous. It's that you're dealing
Exactly.
with all those things at once.
It's like trying to build a plane while you're flying it,
Mhm.
you know? And you could fall out of the air anytime.
Yeah.
Stressful and
Yeah.
impossible
Mhm.
and difficult.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have any memories or stories in particular from that time? It can be with your kids. It can be, just, times that you remember that were really hard, or that you were feeling really deeply around something
Yeah.
in particular. Does anything come to mind that way?
Yeah. One of the driving things was just the belief that this was unsustainable for my kids. And so one story in particular was, I had just assumed that if I just told my kid about like Joseph Smith looking into a hat, that he would know from a young age, and it would just be like, oh, this is normal. There's nothing weird about this, and he wouldn't be shocked later on.
It's like that inoculation.
Yeah,
idea.
inoculation. So like when he was like 5 or 6, I told him this. He came home from church and he's like, "We talked about Joseph Smith," and I was like, and how he made the book, how he translated the Book of Mormon, and he said, I said, "Oh, did you know that Joseph Smith looked into a hat to translate it?" Yeah, and he's like, "You did?" And he's like, "Yeah, he looked into a hat and there's a rock in the hat," and he's like, "Really?" And I thought he would just be like, "Okay." But instead, he just started laughing, and I was playing it straight, like, I wasn't trying to make it a joke or anything. He just started laughing, because it was weird, and it is weird, and
Mhm.
he's like, I couldn't help but just kind of laugh at his response,
Yeah.
but it was like, "Okay, I don't see how this is going to be sustainable to keep, you know,
Yeah.
spoon feeding him the
This other narrative.
this other
The
narrative,
true. Yeah.
and then he's getting a different narrative in church." So it was kind of like, oh gosh. And this was like, you got to figure this out. You got to figure this out. You got to figure this out. Kind of feeling, because he's not going to stop growing. I don't get to push pause and be like, okay, wait a second, everybody. I gotta reorient, and then we'll continue
Mhm.
childhood. Raising my child after I reorient. It's all happening as you're saying. It's flying the plane as you're trying to fix the plane or whatever. It's time is moving fast, and you don't get a second chance to raise a kid.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
hard questions.
So true. Yeah. So if you were going to describe kind of your grief at this point, would you, what you kind of described it a little bit, but what did it look like day to day? Was it, would you say it was confusion? Did it feel like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, it was still confusion. I did find, I attended a few secular Buddhism workshops with Noah Rasheta. I found Lower Lights, School of Wisdom, Thomas McConkie, and I've been involved in that for the past 6 years since it started. Oasis in Provo, Utah. I was part of helping launch that, and I went with my kids. So we'd go to church and then we'd go to Oasis too, or some days vice versa, just depending on the time. And I'm trying to think if there's others. An Awakening Valley Sangha in Provo. So I was finding, and Mormon Transhumanist Association. I was finding like quite a few groups that I could belong to. And I suddenly had a lot of friends from all these groups, and it felt good. Like I personally had a community.
Yes. So you kind of started rebuilding, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Kind of rebuilding what you had lost, reaching out. And what would you say that the connection to these groups gave you during that time?
They gave me camaraderie. So people commiserating in all of the groups. People are dealing with phase shift. And so it's like, oh yeah, you too? Oh yeah, me too. And so it's just like, yeah, we're all in this together. We're all trying to figure it out. And so there's that, like, I'm not alone. And then there is also like a renewed sense of purpose. So, okay, I don't have all the answers, but if I meditate, I can arrive at stillness and find some peace in that. And I can be present and I can live in the now, that kind of practice that is really calming. So like day after day after day, I was feeling more and more great. Like I felt really good to find so many people that I could be friends with and have community with. Yeah.
To extend the aviation metaphor, it sounds like you put the oxygen mask on yourself and found community and friends, and that was an important part of stabilizing you, which then could
Such a good point. Yeah.
could help you figure out then what to do about your kids.
Yep.
I mean, was that
with more calmness, maybe?
Yeah.
Was that surprising to you? Was it surprising to you that you could turn to these outside sources and find the level of connection? I'm just trying to think how you grew up and what your experience was to that point. Like, do you remember, was that surprising to you at all? Or did it feel really organic?
It was surprising because I had that narrative that you talked about, John, which is like the people who aren't part of this collective are the bad people and bad kids. And yeah, I was finding people who were the best people who I'd ever found in my life, just like really vibrant, really spiritually attuned. Many of them were still active in Mormonism in some ways, many of whom weren't. But the divide for me was no longer about that. Are you in? Are you out? Like, are you active? Or are you not active? That wasn't the deciding line anymore. It was more like, are you pursuing ideals? Like, do you want well-being, and are you willing to sacrifice for well-being? Whatever that might look like. And it looks different for so many different people. So yes, it was initially surprising. And then as I saw more and more, I was like, oh yeah, there's actually a lot here. It became less and less surprising.
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, here's another person. Here's another person.
This is so interesting on some level because I think a shift that happened for me post-transition, and it's kind of, I feel like lining up with what you're saying, is this idea that I felt like for so many years, I thought parenting was really solely about the child. But I think post-transition, what I realized is it's really a lot about the parent. And what I mean by that is just like our expectations, how our narrative infuses our children's narrative, how our, what would I say, familiarity and how comfortable we feel with our emotions, how that plays out in the parenting. And that's kind of what I'm hearing you say on some level is you had this space to kind of pay attention to some of those things for a minute.
Mhm.
Is that right? It gave you
Yeah.
kind of this space to kind of process, get your bearings. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really immensely grateful for these organizations, these groups of people, um, especially Lower Lights, because that's what I've been most involved with. But
Mm.
yeah, it really gave me like spirituality that was independent of Mormonism. It wasn't not antagonistic. None of these groups are antagonistic to Mormonism, uh, but it's like just a space to be independent. And yeah,
Yeah.
very, very grateful for all of that.
Yeah. So, can I ask you a quick question just around that and practice? So I'm curious if from any of those groups or let's just say texts or things that you learned, resources within those groups, did any new practices arise during that time that helped you feel more stable, feel a sense of any sort of techniques or practices that were
Mhm.
born in this place of loss, really?
Yeah, a number of them. Most importantly, mindfulness, meditation, the ability to observe what feelings are in my body and what's happening in my body. Oh, I feel tense. Oh, just moment to moment. Oh, I keep having the same thought. That thought keeps arising, just noticing. And so I'm still practicing to be more in tune with my body and my emotions. I feel like I haven't been very much in my life, just like completely attuned to what is arising.
Mhm.
I've trained my brain uh, to be very convincing in its narrative of what my life should be, rather than like, oh, what can I intuit my life should be, even if it doesn't match with
Mm.
what my rational mind says. Like, can I live more intuitively? Um, this is a big part of parenting well, is being able to intuit. And so I struggle with that as a parent.
Mhm.
I have my ideas, and yet, like, the practice of mindfulness over these 6 years has really helped me start that journey of saying, okay, thank you, thoughts. But I'm not just a brain on a pole, I'm a human being that has a body. And so I need to be more attuned to all of this.
Mhm. Yeah. So, do you have a practice? So you meditate? Do you
Mhm.
meditate most like, what does it look like for you right now?
Um,
Knowing that it can ebb and flow and
yeah,
kinda be different.
yeah. Sam Harris's Waking Up app, Insight Timer. Um, I've I did 2 7-day silent retreats, many 3-day retreats and 1-day retreats, um, many 6-week courses on mindfulness. I will go to the Awakening Valley Sangha in Provo as often as I can. For whatever reason, like m- my Sundays sometimes get more full than I want them to, and I'm not able to attend. But whenever I can, I go there
Mhm.
and meditate there. It's just like a sangha. Sangha means community in Buddhism. It's a sangha in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, and so yeah, I'm invested in all of these. Lately, I've felt a desire to return to reading more, just in the
Mhm.
past like 6 months. So I've turned down my attention on like a formal meditation practice and like turned up my reading, just because I'd kind of side tabled it, and I was really like, okay, I need to
Mhm.
recalibrate.
Yeah.
But it's still part of my regular practice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's occurring to me that amidst this loss of community, among other things, that really yourself was born. you know, in some ways, because it took the disintegration, and it took on some level that conflict for you to emerge. You know what I mean? Because for so many years it lined up, church, Ogden, and then John was kind of last. But when that crumbled away, it was John Ogden.
Yeah.
You know, you can't hide. And so it was kind of in some ways the birth of you.
Right. Which is exhilarating and terrifying and lonely. Because I don't know if you can really have well-being if you're just you. I think well-being happens in community. So, but yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, so let me think. So if we were going to pick this back up, so now you have kind of some new practices, new community, you're learning a bit, and you are rebuilding. How has this affected now your kind of parenting sphere or your parenting? Oh,
and to just kind of add on, like, I'm thinking about, this is probably true in Utah and in many places outside of Utah, but it's not like you just yank especially in Utah, you just, oh, okay, your kids don't go to church anymore. Are your kids still going to church? Like, even now, do you want to say?
We
Was there a
hadn't really
transition
gone for
there,
like
I
3
guess?
years. We went this past Easter, and we actually went this past Sunday for the first time in a super long time.
But like the weekly, you know, in the personal progress, or in the Cub Scouts, or in the Boy Scouts.
My son is friends with neighborhood kids, and I was like, oh, okay, let's go to be with the neighborhood kids.
And I had to ask that just to get a sense for where you are, so that I could ask how you navigated it, because at least for us, it wasn't just like, oh, we stopped going, and oh, hey, ward members, our kids don't need your outreach anymore. We don't need the cookies on our doorstep. We don't need you to come and ask them why they weren't at church. We're kind of stepping back as a family. And thank you very much. It's not like you just do that. It's like all of a sudden, if their friends were all the people in the ward or at school or in seminary, and it seems to me like word kind of travels around that, like, the DeLynn family, the Ogden family, they're not kind of on plan. They got off the train. And then all of a sudden, sometimes I guess there's Mormon kids that just, it's business as usual. They don't care. Other times it's kind of like, you don't get the invites, you get cut out of the text strings, you lose friends, worst case, or worst case, people gossip about you, and your kids are now viewed as bad or dangerous. And I mean, it can be anything from like nothing changed to like really, really hard and painful for your kids. And so I'm just saying that decision to start to individually pull back, and even if your kids are still going and you're not going as much, ward council can happen, and word can get around that, well, let's make John a project, and let's have the visiting teachers or the ministers, or, oh, well, let's have other people step up to parent these kids, because clearly John isn't, doing his role. Like, I'm just saying that, like, to individually step back or to have a family step back, especially in Utah, but potentially anywhere where you're Mormon, is a non-trivial thing oftentimes for your kids.
Yeah.
So I don't know if adding on to what you were asking, Margi.
Well, why don't you just answer that one first, and then we'll come back to mine.
Okay. I was hoping that was adjacent. I didn't mean to override your
question. That's okay. Just do that one, and then I'll follow up. So John's question.
The question is,
how'd you navigate that?
Was
that an issue? And did things, how was it? Is there anything you want to say about how it was for you and your kids as you guys started stepping back? And then how you managed however it was?
So my kid wasn't old enough to really have a desire to like be friends at the time.
Because how old was your son?
He was 7, 8,
Baptism age.
Yeah. So we did baptize him. And
as a nuanced kind of non-literal believer.
Yeah. But that was like right at the time that we were distancing. And he'll get invited to activity days, and I'm happy if he goes. It's great to be able to meet the neighborhood kids and do the activities, and activities days leader is great. And so, other than that, there hasn't been contact really. I will, like 3 years ago when we did start, we stopped going as often or at all. The bishop came over, and it was just incredible. He just asked if he could help. In the course of the conversation, we found out that our swamp cooler was broken, and he knew how to fix it. And he went and got the stuff and came back and fixed it. And it was like I was stalled on the problem, and he just did it like really quick. And I was like, wow, this is like, to me, this is Mormonism at its best. It's like, here, you need help, I'm gonna help you. And he didn't even say anything, come to church or anything like that. He was just like very in tune to what was authentic, and just went with it. So yeah, it's, other than that though, no contact really. So it's,
And was that an issue? Were there primary leaders coming, dropping off
every
pictures of
once in a
Jesus
while,
and like saying, "We missed you at church. Why weren't you?" None of.
Very infrequently there was some thing at our door, and I'm fine with that. I didn't get rankled by any of that.
So you're saying your kids were young enough to where stopping going to church, even in Utah County, was not very disruptive to their
Not very
lives?
disruptive. And
Okay.
now now my oldest is friends with some neighborhood kids, and so that's the past few weeks. We've been like, oh yeah, well,
Okay.
we want to be friendly neighbors.
So I hear you saying if you're going to do it young, before they're before they're teens, and
different
everything's
story.
intermingled.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Margie, I didn't mean to step
Oh,
on
that's
your
okay.
question.
So my original question was just, as you have this space and you're connecting with these communities, how would you say your parenting, to bring it back to parenting now, like, how did it change? How did it affect your parenting? And, even a little bit of what it looks like.
Yeah. So we started going to different services. So like an Episcopal service, the Awakening Valley Sangha, the Hare Krishna Temple in Spanish Fork. And so we would go to various services, even as we were still going to Mormonism or not. It was kind of like organically. Yeah, let's do this. Let's explore this. Let's do this. Obviously, that all shifted with COVID. That side of things became more difficult. And at the same time, we were also wondering, like, what do we do as a family? Getting back to that, like, what are our family values, and what do we want to talk about as a family? And a group of us. This is where a group of us at Lower Lights, we done our the 9-month program. Meeting 5 times or 4 times over the course of the 9 months. And 4 of us started talking about, we have all this stuff for grownups, all the organizations that I just listed, but there is just nothing for kids that really talks about spirituality, that talks about mindfulness. That's a community approach. Is there any way that we could help bring this about? Not to have the answer. I don't think there is the answer anymore. There's no the answer. You're not going to find it. But to be one node in a network that is trying to bring about well-being and wellness and authentic spirituality. And so that's where we started talking about what has become Uplift Kids. And it is just like, how do we have conversations about these topics? We're living busy lives day to day, figuring out how to feed our kids breakfast, how to get them to school. When they get home from school, do your chores. Now let's have dinner. Now maybe we can talk or watch a movie or whatever and go to bed. And that's like day to day to day to day to day. And often in that busyness, we just forget, like, oh yeah, we should talk about kindness. We should talk about compassion, and we should talk about forgiveness and what it means to be a good human being. And so that's where this idea of a lesson library and curriculum came about. And so in our home, it was like lots of prototyping. Let's try this, let's try that. What works for us? What doesn't work for us?
Was
you
it
know?
almost like creating a family culture?
Exactly. Yeah. So we actually wrote out, and maybe this is influenced by Covey, like, what is intellectual health? What is intellectual health in our house? What is spiritual health? What is emotional health? What is physical health? So we had those four, and like, these are the components, that make these are our values as a family that we hold. And so to me, at least, it was like, here's ground.
Mm-hmm.
The ground gave way. I don't have anything. But then on further reflection, it's like, wait a second, I still value reading widely. I still value physical health. I still value, being part of a community, social health. And so it's like the ground is still here,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
except for the community component for kids. That is still the
Mm.
part that
Yeah.
is incredibly difficult. But in the home, I felt like, okay, here's ground again.
Yeah.
And maybe it's honestly not wildly different than the ground that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
It's not worlds apart from it.
Right. Yeah.
Some truth claims aren't the same,
Mm-hmm.
but the striving for uh, physical health, again, sleep, exercise, diet, intellectual health. We read widely. I could go through the full list, but the principles are very much similar.
Mm-hmm.
And so what can happen is that we have this narrative of like, are you in or are you out? That becomes the fixation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, that is important, because that's how a
Mm-hmm.
community, that's how a people is formed, a community is formed. And like, what if we weren't so fixated on the in or out question, and we were more fixated on, thriving, uh,
Mm-hmm.
improvement, well-being,
Mm-hmm.
just the root of spirituality, etc. So that's what it's come to look like in our home.
Okay. So are there any like family traditions or rituals that have grown out of these values, would you say?
Mhm.
Do you want to
Yeah.
share a few?
Yeah. I'll share one that I dropped and then came back to, which was prayer. I dropped it in light of my faith crisis, and then I found that like there, I'm just not doing anything. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
not expressing gratitude. I used to be having like a daily gratitude practice, and I'm not. And so that's become again one part of our ritual, is just like a prayer. Um, Another is lighting a candle to start the lesson and end the lesson, is just like light a candle.
Mm.
Another is like learning songs that are um, spiritual in nature, not necessarily LDS, but some LDS, and having those still be part of our repertoire as a family, is singing
Mm.
and music. Um, Meditation is one, like just stillness, noticing the breath, noticing the emotion, naming the emotion. This is a big part of the lesson library curriculum is about emotional well-being. And so it's like, can you name it? Can you really feel it in your body? Where is it in your body? Can you think the emotion, whatever it is? If it's anger, can you recognize what anger wants you to do
Mm-hmm.
and then thank it for being there in your life
Mm-hmm.
rather than repressing it? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the two ones that are absolutely new are the emotional intelligence and the meditation. So those
Yeah.
have been added
Yeah.
in our home.
Okay. So I feel like in the rebuilding, this kind of rebuilding, is it true? I was going to ask you kind of the hardest, kind of the hardest aspects of rebuilding around parenting in particular, and then some really joyful, victories in the process. Would community be one of the hardest, would you say?
100%.
So that's still the
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
so hard.
Yeah.
Did you try things and have them not work?
We've we've started testing what it's like to do Uplift together with other families.
Did you try,
so-
like Margie and I took our kids to some Protestant churches
Oh, yeah.
or Unitarian Universalist churches, or we did Oasis for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
It
totally.
felt a lot like what you did, what you described.
And those didn't work. Like, why not the Unitarian Universalists?
Right.
As an example.
I don't know about that one specifically, but I can say, like, with Oasis, to me, it didn't feel like it had a tie to the past. Like, there's roots in religion that are really deep, and that's part of the awe or the draw of religion, is like, I'm part of a people, with a story. We have a text, and there's this sense that we're meeting together for the purpose of having a spiritual experience, of connecting to God, connecting to the divine. That's the reason we're meeting together. And I felt like Oasis was like about the latest in psychological well-being, which is awesome, but that's a little different than awe and spirituality. And then the kids portion was just whatever it was. There was no curriculum of any kind. And so it was loosey goosey. I can't complain. I mean, it was fine for what it was, but it just didn't.
But it wouldn't fill the hole
wouldn't fill the hole, yeah, it was
around
a different thing.
community for kids in particular.
Exactly. And then there was another part of your question, John, that I'm trying to remember.
Oh, other communities that you tried? Was that the question? What
Yeah.
you had tried in the way of trying
Yeah.
to form community?
The thing that I realized pretty quickly is, like, many of the critiques that I would have of Mormonism, I also have of other communities. And so, like, it's you're kind of back at the same problem as you try. Like, you get into Protestantism, it's like, oh, you have tons of truth claim issues with the New Testament, the Old Testament. And so you're kind of like, okay, I could do this, but then I'm going to have to still be guiding my kids through the hurdles of what this represents.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do take my son to the Awakening Valley Sangha in Provo. But it's, there'll be one or two other kids there. It's grown-ups other than that. But we'll sit and do the meditation, and he likes it after the fact. When I say, let's go again, he's like, no, I don't want to go. But then after, he's like, oh, that was really good. And so he likes it. But it's not Buddhism. Just as far as I've seen, everything I've seen from Buddhism does not have a good sense of, like, kids. It's monastic. And so we've tried various things. They're working okay.
Yeah.
But not phenomenally.
Yeah.
I have to ask, because you mentioned praying. Where did you settle on God? What are you praying to? And then I want to get right back to Margie.
Yeah.
Just that piece. You when you mentioned the awe,
Yeah.
you have to agree on what the source of the awe is.
Yeah. For me, it's the great mystery. And so there's nothing embodied. The Tao Te Ching says darkness within darkness, the gateway to all mystery. So it's like the Tao, the Brahman in Hinduism. It's just the all, you could call it the Force from Star Wars. It's just like something that you can't quite articulate, but is present in life. I think there's a book that I love called The Little Book of Atheist Spirituality, where this French philosopher talks about spiritual experience, and he talks about walking through a forest and one night and just experiencing, like, the all is what he calls it, with a capital A. And there's nothing beyond that. There's nothing that I can say authoritatively beyond that. But dear God, not Yahweh, it's like not the Hebrew version that I grew up with. But still wanting to reclaim that word and re-enliven that word, for lack of a better word. I would love a better word to exist, but maybe it does. But just as a way to touch into that which is beyond me, and that's what God is. So I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about some of the things that you were sharing with regard to kind of the family culture rebuilding you've done.
Mhm.
And And I was noticing something how, for me, I'm curious how you think about this, but for me, so much of when I looked at spirituality before, it was like creating moments, like create a
Mm,
scripture study. You
mm,
would like appendage it, add
mm,
it to life.
mm,
Life was happening, but you would add it and it would have its kind of own space for that. Um, or you went to the building on Sunday to get the
mhm,
spirituality, or you went and had, the youth group thing and you went and got it. For me, it was like quite disconnected overall to life. Even
mm,
prayer for me was like very structured. It was like certain times you do it or before the meal. And I think there's this fluidity of spirituality where it is life.
yeah,
Like you don't have this sense that you're actually having to create this appendage. It's like it's all a part.
yeah,
It is part of life. And so it shows up in life. It shows up in you know these times to connect to kindness, these times to connect with what it means to be curious or open to
mhm,
ideas that is integrated into your everyday. So
yeah,
spirituality is life
mhm,
as opposed to a place you go or during from 6 to 7 when you've got the book open
yeah,
and you're reading the scriptures together. Or is that your experience? I felt that when you were
mm,
explaining it.
yeah, yeah. I love that word, life. It is life, and that's one of the words that I sometimes use when I talk about the divine. Is just life, you know, and I find power in that.
Hmm.
Um, I agree that spirituality is life, and it's about observing what is happening and being attuned and present to what's happening. And I think that both the structure and both the form and the formless are part of spirituality. So the formlessness is just we're not going to try to do anything as an add-on. We're just going to be fully attuned to life. I think that's a really beautiful approach to spirituality. And I think it's worth having touchstones, just touch points rather, where you just say, "Hey, are we remembering?" On
Hmm.
Sunday morning we do this, whatever it might be, to remember, because it's easy to forget, to
Yeah.
get wrapped up and be mindless.
So like the idea of ritual almost.
The idea of ritual, and so it could take the form of a sit down conversation. It could take a form of, hey, on Sunday morning we're gonna gather together and sing some songs. You know, just touch points.
Yeah.
And
Touch
so
points.
that's what we hope happens with Uplift. However families take it, and they do take it in a bunch of different directions, which is
Hmm.
great.
They get to personalize
Yeah,
it,
they
right?
personalize it exactly. And some do we're still the structure. We're going to do this every week at the exact same time, and this is what we're going to do. Great. If that's what works for your family, great. Others, the parents will just read. We have like a preparation guide. They'll just read it, and then they'll just weave it into their natural conversations throughout the week. And I think
Yeah.
both approaches are beautiful, and it is kind of like personal to each. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is ultimately about being attuned to life.
Yeah. So, how are there certain resources for you that have felt pivotal to your parenting journey in particular?
Yeah. One is a book called The Spiritual Child by Lisa Miller, who's a professor of psychology out of Columbia University. And she does neuroscientific research and studies spirituality specifically. And so she points to her studies and others where the science is emerging, and it could turn out like all of this is baloney, as time goes on. But the emerging science is showing that there's a correlation between spirituality and well-being, and that when people are having a spiritual experience, there's certain activity in the brain, and that activity in the brain is correlated with higher well-being. People they're mapping it to say like, okay, what's happening in the brain and what does it look like, and what does the opposite look like of certain problems, mental illnesses, and they're starting to map what
Hmm.
different states of the brain look like. And so her studies show that spirituality and religion often overlap, but they don't always. And she's saying that when families have spiritual experiences together, kids who have heightened spirituality have lower rates of depression, lower rates of anxiety, lower sexual impulsivity, and lower rates of drug use.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really helpful to me to see that this is being validated.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean make them scrupulous,
Mm-hmm.
as religion sometimes can.
Rigid.
Rigid. It means really pay attention to what's happening spiritually in the home, and it's going to yield real world benefits for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so just seeing the data that Lisa Miller has put out and others, Andrew Newberg is another one who studies it, LDS person, Michael Ferguson at a Harvard Divinity School is also studying it.
Mm-hmm.
So the emerging neuroscience, when I read
Mm-hmm.
about that's really influenced me.
Mm-hmm.
Another is like classics of like how to talk so your kids will listen and listen so your kids will talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a staple of parenting. It's very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Very good book. I can't remember her last name right now. Shafali, who wrote The Awakening Family
Mm-hmm.
and The Conscious Spirit.
Sabari.
That approach that you mentioned, like changing as a parent,
Mm-hmm.
is also really beautiful and part of it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, those are a few of the parenting books.
Yeah.
And then I still find value in like the Ayers Covey, the Ayer Covey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to pronounce it. EYRE.
I think it's there. I
Ayer.
don't know. I don't know.
Covey
Yeah.
approach. Like
Yeah.
I still think that
Is
there's
there
a
a
lot
book?
of value.
Is there a main book?
I can't remember the name of it right now.
They used to
There was,
have
like,
wasn't
So I have
they
one,
had like
7 Habits of Highly Effective Families. Is that it?
that's Covey's, and then theirs is like
teaching your children responsibility. They have kind of values based.
There's one that covers 12 values.
Oh, really? So you could maybe look at that one.
Okay.
They have like preschool ones called like the Joy. It's
Yeah,
like
they did
Joy
preschool.
School or
Joy School. That's right.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: when you're talking about spirituality in your home and for your children to feel, what do you mean? What does that mean to you?
It means to me, it's related to stillness and it's related to gratitude. We talk about 6 spiritual emotions that come about as we practice spirituality: peace, gratitude, awe, connection, joy, and love. And so those are all still pretty abstract. Spirituality is abstract because it means connection with the ineffable. And so you, by definition, you can't fully put it in words because it's an experience that you either feel or you don't. But you know it when you feel it. But then the emotions are a little bit just slightly more concrete. And then talking about the experience of getting to those emotions, often it requires things that aren't necessarily pleasant, like meditation or service, or what are some other ones? Singing is pleasant. So
yeah,
being vulnerable, another one. So
yeah,
getting a little bit more concrete to point at something that you can't fully put into words.
Yeah. I feel like that's where I have found the most power when it comes to kind of values, is really being curious about the value and what it means to me, what it means to my children, which it can mean really different things to different people, and then what it looks like to live it in a way that people want to. Children want to live that value. And that becomes sort of the practices, is sort of, how do we live that value? What would it look like? What are the activities we would do? And really making it something that's less of a should or an aspirational thing, and coming from this place of, we would want to do that.
Yeah.
That would feel good if we did that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, great. So I feel like now might be a good time to lean into the slides as we talk about kind of Uplift Kids and a little bit of what that looks like. And then I might have a final question after that, but we can go ahead and lean into that.
Yeah. And let me just say, like, we never want Mormon stories to be kind of like a product placement kind of thing. And I try and make sure that every episode
Yeah.
isn't just like, watch this movie or read this book or like buy this curriculum thing on the one hand. And on the other hand, we need resources. We do. So, in bringing you on, it was one, because I've known you for many years and I respect you. And I know you're well respected. So just wanting to hear your story and get a sense of you and how you've navigated your journey. And that's kind of what we've done so far.
Yep.
But I also know that this resource that you've developed or are trying to develop for kids comes from having explored many of the same areas that Margi and I have explored, except you've been able to dig deep and come up with something that where you're trying to be a part of the solution. So if somebody in our community or elsewhere is like coming up with a high quality solution that we think could help be part of the answer to the journey that we're all having, well, heck yeah, I'm going to promote it. So this isn't just like an infomercial.
Mm-hmm.
We asked you to kind of put together some of the principles that guide the product that you're offering, and then we're okay with you letting people know if they want to learn more.
Yeah.
So that's the spirit of what listeners and viewers, that's the spirit of what you're about to hear.
Wait, can I say something really quick?
Please.
So one thing that I just feel really strongly about is this is why we do stories, right? Because the idea is not to be prescriptive. In no story that we highlight is the point that people should duplicate, or we're saying do this thing or this should work for you. Really, it's just touch points on people's journeys. And if it happens to find you in a place in your journey, you won't feel alone, and you can kind of see the resources or kind of, and here's the thing, like options are great, and options that appeal to a lot of different personalities in different places, in people's, even family life and ages, they're good. Options are good. So I hope to give you more stories and more options with this idea of, you get to decide for you. And that's the beauty of this, but options are good.
Yeah. So if you're comfortable, like what is Uplift, and what problem you're trying to solve, and then talk us through kind of the core philosophies. Yeah.
Sure. Uplift is currently a lesson library and curriculum, and it covers lessons that they're really conversation starters. And so we curate videos and we create activities, printouts. We have emotion cards, stuff like this that helps families talk about values, whether they're in or out of a religion. We welcome both, and we find that many of people who use it are still members, but they're unorthodox. They don't quite fit in, and we find that many aren't religious anymore. And so it's kind of a way to say, like, regardless of belief, can we unite around these values?
Okay. Yeah. That sounds great. So do you want to kind of talk us through these slides?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll just echo what both of you said. As a parent, I really would love to learn about more resources. So if there's anybody listening to this, like, please reach out and let me know. I would really value any range of resources from anybody who's working in a similar space on a similar problem. I view Uplift as a resource that is helpful for some personalities, as you said, and might not be as helpful for other personalities. It's fine. But as a parent, I really want community. And so if anybody is also doing this, I would love to hear what you are doing and listen to you as well.
Okay.
So yeah, we can go ahead and look at the principles. So there were 7 principles that we talked about when we were creating Uplift, and that's what we'll show here. Okay. So the first principle that we talk about is that we can value your inner compass, and so it starts inside rather than external. And we really want kids to be able to learn what it feels like to be in tune with their true self. And so again, that doesn't have anything to do with belief or disbelief. It's not like get in tune with a particular version of deity. It's like, no, get in tune with your inner compass, your conscience, and have integrity.
Yes.
Learn how to have integrity. Oh, I shouldn't do that, and I know I shouldn't do that because it's not aligned with my inner compass. And this is a term that Lisa Miller uses in her work, and so we've integrated it in our work as well.
Inner compass.
So I got the slides working now.
Oh, great.
So did you want to start with this one?
I'll just mention that this is showing that this is everybody who's listening knows that this is a problem. And
what is
so,
for those who are just listening?
Sorry, yes, thank you.
There's a listening audience.
Yes, thank you. Church membership over time. U.S. adults asked, "Do you happen to be a member of the church, synagogue, or mosque?" It's dropped from 74% in 1990 to less than 40%, 47%. Sorry, today. So less than half of people now are doing this, and so those who want to pretend this isn't happening, I think, are on a losing battle. Like, we have to acknowledge it's happening.
So you're saying even if you're raising your kids Mormon,
yes,
chances are your kids are going to leave it.
Yeah. Yep. And that is what's driving me is like that unsustainability. Mormonism is great, but I don't see it being sustainable.
Yeah.
And so I just have to accept, like, be honest about that fact.
Right.
And then
maybe sustainable for some.
Yeah, absolutely.
But probably for a minority.
Yeah. When I say that, I'm talking about my kids, seeing how my kids are interacting with it.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, it's not sustainable. I need something. I need help. I need resources. Thus, this is what's leading us to Uplift.
Yeah.
So Rachel Held Evans is a Christian writer. She said, "I knew how I didn't want to raise my two kids, but I wasn't sure how I did want to raise them." In the wake of her faith shift, I think a lot of parents can relate. And so here we're talking about giving your kids an inner compass, starting with this. Everybody, regardless of belief, has access to your own inner compass. And so how do you train a child to really be true to that?
And that's almost the opposite of how you describe being raised as a Mormon.
Yeah, it's interesting, the overlap there, because I think there is an element of, if you feel the Spirit, you want to feel the Spirit. And I think there is overlap between inner compass and feeling the Spirit. And so it's
or what
not
people described as feeling the Spirit.
exactly. Yeah. So it's not antithetical, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. If that makes sense.
Sure.
And it is internal.
Mhm.
It is connection to self,
Right.
as opposed to authority or inner compasses, right?
Yep. And so in the institutions generally, but Mormonism specifically, wants to have the narrative that if you feel the Spirit, that means that the institution is true. And that's not necessarily what that means. But that's not to say that you shouldn't feel the Spirit, right? What it's called, feeling the Spirit. You should want more of that in your life.
Just elevation emotion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And awe and this sense of wonder.
Yep. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
And just
really
inspired and uplifted.
Yep. Exactly.
Uplift.
Yep.
Uplifted.
Exactly. There you go. There you go.
We're doing the work.
Maybe not subtle enough. But yeah, that's it.
Okay.
So yeah, here are the 7 insights. We've been working on it for 2 years. Here are the insights we've gained on the way.
So these are like 7 pillars.
Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah. So families can take it, like you said, if a family isn't interested in Uplift, so be it. But hopefully these 7 principles are helpful, even if you don't have any interest in Uplift.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So principle number 1.
Yep. So you have inner authority, call it conscience, nature, spirit, source, true self, the divine, you call it God. Whatever word you use, you have direct access to it. In a word, this is spirituality. So defining spirituality. And this is, again, I want to emphasize, it's for non-believers and believers. So we have Sam Harris here, who says the deliberate efforts some people make to overcome their feeling of separateness.
That's spirituality for Sam Harris.
That's spirituality for Sam Harris. So,
Overcoming the feeling of separateness.
yeah. Yeah. So I know a lot of post-Mormons rankle at the use of spiritual.
The word.
The word, yeah.
Yeah, it's
It
triggering.
comes up a lot.
It's
Yeah, it's
triggering.
very triggering for
Yeah.
people. And I'm sympathetic to that. I understand that viewpoint, but we're talking about it in a way that could be 100% secular in its approach. And Sam Harris is one person, but the other neuroscientists that I talked about are also others. Brene Brown says spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us. So again, it's like connection. You asked earlier what the definition of spirituality is. You can't fully put it in words, but if I were to choose a single word, it would be connection. It's about connection,
Mhm.
and then a connection to each other and connection to whatever is beyond us or bigger than
Mhm.
us, even if it's just death or even if it's just nature, so be it. That's spirituality. And then the benefits of spirituality have been studied. This is the emerging science that Andrew Newberg, who's a professor and neuroscientist, says that spiritual practices, even when stripped of religious beliefs, enhance the neural functioning of the brain in ways that improve physical and emotional health. So when we were first starting out, some of the prototype families that did it with, they said, well, why are you emphasizing spirituality? Why don't you just talk about emotional health? And it's a fair point, but we really feel like there aren't a lot of resources for those who want spiritual health. And so we're focused on this because we see if you have really strong spiritual health, you'll have benefits physically and emotionally. Lisa Miller, she says children who are raised with a robust and well-developed spiritual life are happier, more optimistic, more thriving, more flexible, and better equipped to deal with life's ordinary and even extraordinary traumas than those who are not. So that's the neuroscience.
She's at Columbia University.
Yeah, professor of psychology. Yep.
Okay. So that's point one.
That's point one.
All right. What's point two?
Point two is that you have access to science and wisdom. So in the midst of a faith crisis, you can feel like you don't have anything. But if you take a step back, you can see like, oh, there's actually a ton of resources out there that can serve as a foundation for my life now. And so this neuroscience, academic studies on growth mindset, emotional intelligence, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, all of that is there. And it's a foundation, really strong foundation for living a life of well-being.
So are you saying your curriculum has DBT, CBT built in, like exercises from DBT?
Yeah. So one of our founders is training to become a therapist right now. And so we pull from her. Another is counselor at schools. So she has a master's in counseling and works with kids that are dealing with psychological problems. So we're pulling in all that kind of stuff.
So DBT, for those who don't know, would be skills or tools for emotion regulation.
Yep.
It was developed for people with borderline personality disorder, but it's just mindfulness,
But in truth,
meditation, breathing.
Totally.
yeah, like every human,
naming your
needs.
emotions.
Yep.
Distress tolerance.
Yeah.
How to cool down.
Exactly.
That kind of stuff.
So we don't say, hey kids, we're going to learn about dialectical behavioral therapy. That's not the approach that we take. We do it at their level. And so they wouldn't know, oh, this is dialectical. They wouldn't have any idea that that's what we're doing, but we're definitely pulling from all of those resources.
I love that so much.
Okay.
So, and then the other one that often gets neglected in a secular culture is like Stoicism, Taoism, Buddhism, Christianity. So this is wisdom. And one approach is to say, and I empathize with this approach, we should just get rid of all these ancient books because they're misogynistic and they're brutal and they're horrible, and they are in so many ways. And yet there are gems that ancient human beings did have some insights into the nature of spirituality and life that are still worth keeping with us. And so we say science and wisdom together, meaning the present understanding of science and the past really make for a healthy approach to well-being.
As far as I'm concerned, Stoicism is solid. Taoism is super solid. The Tao Te Ching solid. No,
It's so
I
good.
don't know any. Like I studied the Tao Te Ching. There's no God talk or Holy Ghost talk. It's literally just like how to navigate mental health principles.
Mhm.
Secular Buddhism, same deal.
Yeah.
And even like Eckhart Tolle draws on Christianity, not kind of like corporate Christianity, but
Right.
just kind of core Jesus teachings.
Yeah,
The
wisdom.
kingdom of God is within.
Yep.
You know, that kind of thing. Be kind, be patient, love others, serve others.
Yeah,
That's all, listen, forgive people. That's all kind of solid stuff.
Yeah. Yep, that's it.
Okay. And then meditation, singing, gratitude, right?
Yep.
Those are all wisdom traditions.
Yep.
All right.
Absolutely. So, speaking of the Tao Te Ching, the wisdom includes not knowing, and I think this is really important, coming from a place where you're
I love this.
knowing,
Yes.
I know the church is true. I know this, that kind of thing. Wisdom can have some of that stance where you do have confidence, but it also has this opposite where you're just not sure. So in the Tao Te Ching, this translation says, "Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself?" So wisdom is inviting us to turn into our inner compass and say, you know what? I'm being told to do this, but in my heart of hearts, I know that for me, this is the way to actually best help the world, whatever that might be. But you really have to come to stillness, because the voices are going to tell you one thing. The institutions will tell you, do this, do this, do this. And that may or may not be right. And I'll add here, the inversion of what the institution says also may or may not be right. So it's important to recognize, like, you can't get to truth just by saying, okay, here's the checklist, I'm just going to do the opposite, in leaving religion.
Oh, like the reaction to
the
meaning?
reaction to religion. That's not well-being either. You're still living a life that's based on a checklist.
It's so true. You're still being controlled by the checklist.
Exactly.
Too.
It's independent of the checklist, but you can dialogue with the checklist and then come to your own conclusion. You know what? For me, I'm actually not going to do this point.
Yeah. This reminds me a little bit of Rilke. The live the question.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's such a beautiful line. I really love that line. And then the third one, to move on, is you can make sense of growth. So models of development help us understand how our worldviews evolve. So there are many stages of faith, Fowler's stages of faith. And maybe your listeners are all familiar with this one from former pastor Brian McLaren. I really like it. It's probably my favorite of all the models, just because it's so simple. So he just has 4 stages: simplicity, complexity, perplexity, harmony. Those are the 4 stages of development. And this quote here is about the third one, perplexity. And I think a lot of people can relate to this who've had a faith crisis or an awakening. It says, unable to find a community that fits their stage, many stage 3 people have only one option. They must walk out their questions alone. If they find community at all, it tends to be among alienated individuals like themselves. I think a lot of people can relate to this. These are the people who I've met in the organization that I belong to. We're all kind of living it out alone, looking for some semblance of community.
And as I'm kind of looking at this this model of simplicity, complexity, perplexity, harmony, it's reminding me of Fowler's stages of faith, because you start out with this. It doesn't matter what religious tradition or secular tradition you're raised in. You've got this kind of, this is the truth. Your parents have to raise you in something. So if you're fortunate to have parents, they give you a worldview to start with. And then that's simplicity. And then at some point, whether it's in high school or college, you realize, whoa, things are more complex than the worldview my parents gave to me. And that's not, and so that's sort of the discovery of all these different options, which can be fun. But then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, where do I go?
Nothing is ground.
what's solid? What's the answer? There's conflicting things. If I choose this, it's exclusive of that. Some of these values, you can figure out a bunch of values, but then maybe some of the values conflict with each other, like autonomy, but community, like kindness, but boundaries, and so the fourth stage is harmony, where you learn to have complex values, but you find a way to harmonize them in a way
Yep.
that works for you.
Yep.
I mean, that's kind of how so you're
That's
saying
it.
your curriculum would help a kid identify those stages and work them through those stages.
Yeah. And anticipate that life is a process. That you know, you're going to have a worldview, and that's great. You know, I can accept my 6-year-old worldview 100%. Awesome. And let them know part of growing up is changing. You know, if they can get that sense and they don't feel like, oh, I don't know, how come it changed? You know, if they know change is part of the process, they don't feel so disoriented when it happens.
I see why this is one of your favorites.
Right.
Because I just see it in your story so much. Yeah.
And then fourth, you have individual strengths. And so lean into your strengths as a parent and recognize the individual strengths of each of your kids. And so this is the idea that you need to be you, and you're not made to be what everybody else should be. So one example of this is Strengths Finder, where you try to find your 5 top strengths. And it really helped me when I took that test, just because it made me love others more than I had previously. Because in the LDS model, again, going back to the story, there's the sense of when I was doing my duty to God, like, okay, if you're doing this checklist, if you're doing it well, then you're a good kid.
That's right.
If you're not doing it well, then you're not as good. And yet this made me see, like, okay, that's first, it helped me love myself, because I was ashamed of my self-righteousness, because that's wrong. And it like, I have no defense of that, but it helped me see, like, you know what, that was my personality, and I can love my personality. And because I can love my personality, and I don't have to have everybody have my personality, I can also love your personality. And so it really feels foundational to the idea of love.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a great, I also see that it's a buffer to perfectionism. This idea that you have to do it all and do it all really well. And that's what emerges, I think, sometimes naturally when you love so deeply. When you love so deeply, you want to be all those things.
Yep.
And so this is just a really great inoculator, to return to that analogy of just, we all have strengths. So don't try to put all your energy into being it all. Like, you can actually be wise with your energy and maximize on your strengths and allow your kids to do that. And that can be tremendously relieving, because I do feel like school, we still have systems that still are remnants of these places where children really feel pressured to be good at everything, as opposed to this idea that as adults, we're not good at everything. Like, it's okay to have certain interests and to do those things really well. And so I really love this. Yeah.
Yeah. Cindy Wing Brandt says that sometimes we were so focused on the potential of children to grow into whatever exciting persons they may be, that we forget they're already those persons. And their potential may not be lying in the future, but embedded with them in the present. And so
I had a friend explain to me once that parenting is more like gardening than carpentry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The seed comes with who they are and what they are.
Exactly.
You're not supposed to mold your kids into some vision you have for them.
Exactly.
You're going to help them figure out who they are and then nurture that.
Yes. They're their own entity.
Yep.
I love that.
Yeah. It's a good metaphor.
Yeah. Okay.
So the fifth one is you can find the middle way. And so any virtue held too tightly becomes a vice, similar to how holding the in-breath or the out-breath leads to death. And so you were saying, as you grow up, you learn, like, oh, you need kindness and you need boundaries. You need autonomy and you need community. And if you grip one of these, you're into vice territory. And so too much courage is recklessness. Too much caution is cowardliness, cowardliness. Too much confidence is arrogance. Too much humility is timid. Down the line, too much skepticism is cynical. Too much trust is gullible. And so helping kids understand this virtue is awesome. It's fantastic to be kind. And you also need to stand up for yourself. So explore the virtues and tension, prepares them for the complexity.
You got
We can go
another
ahead.
list. You got another list.
We can go ahead and skip through this one, but it's just the idea that, as I talk about in my book, When Mormons Doubt, like truth without beauty is cynical, truth without goodness is lonely, etc.
Oh, those are great.
Any one of those held in isolation is actually not a virtue.
Love it.
So thoughtful.
It's good stuff.
And then 6, you have your family stories. So at times it's like, well, what do I tell my kids? What stories do I pass on if I don't have a traditional view? Like, you have hundreds of stories that you can tell. Tell stories about the believers and the non-believers. You know, if you have pioneer ancestors from the first generation of Mormons, so even if your family's been Mormon for 200 years, that's like 1/2000th of the time that humans have been around. And so expand your, depending on how you say when humanity originated, expand your view. Like, who was part of your family before they became Mormon? What are their stories? You know, so you include all the stories, the good and the bad, etc. I can go ahead and skip this one as well. Just this idea that, you know, our lineage goes back far
Right.
beyond, even if you've been a Mormon for 200 years.
Mhm.
So tell those stories, as many as you have. And then finally, you have relationships. So make relationships, not truth claims, the focus. I really love this quote from Mark Twain. He says, "There isn't time so brief as life for bickerings, apologies, heartburnings, callings to account. There is only time for loving, and but an instant, so to speak, for that." And so the point of the lesson library isn't to teach them a bunch of information. It's a springboard that hopefully deepens your relationships. And if it's not worthwhile, right? So at Uplift, we would say use it to the extent that it helps you have deeper connection with your kids and deeper connection as a family. That's the point.
Wonderful.
And I love this vision that you've got in this final slide.
Yeah. So finally, the final slide, it says a possible vision for the future. Imagine if religiously connected people joined with their non-religious counterparts. Imagine that they integrate the best resources they can find from religious traditions, brain science, education, sociology, psychology, anthropology, and art, gleaning anything of value from anywhere they can find it, systematically helping people to achieve the most advanced forms of moral development possible. I love it because the vision I think that the vision for the future is not, are you in or are you out of religion again? I think it's working alongside people who happen to be believers or non-believers, and not making belief the focal point, but saying, you know what, well-being and these timeless ideals, that's the focal point. Oh, you happen to be Mormon? Cool. Like, I'll be your friend, as long as it's reciprocated that they're okay with you, you know, not being Mormon.
Right. Right.
So how do people find Uplift?
Upliftkids.org.
Okay, we'll add that in the show notes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. So much goodness and thoughtfulness
Thanks.
with those slides. Yeah. So my final question is just around what, if you could just say briefly what you used to want for your children and now what you want for your children.
Yeah. So when I was young, I would want them to do the checklist. And now, well, and I would say, related to your comment about schooling, to get A's in every single class, you know, be good at every subject, excel, you know. Now I'm just as interested in listening to who they are. Who are you meant to be? Even if you happen to get a C in math, like, if you are meant to be a writer or whatever it is, go for it. Double down. Like, you know, focus on that, and you be your best version of yourself, because what the world needs is your best version of yourself. Doesn't need you to be another version of yourself.
Yeah. And them deciding that what the best version
Yeah.
is.
And I, as a parent, I'm a guide, and I'm also a fellow journeyer,
Mhm.
on the journey together, saying, hey, I'll reflect to you what I see your strengths are, but I'm here to let you find your voice, whatever it might be.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, John Ogden.
Mhm.
We appreciate you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. And until next time, happy thriving.